Upper molar DO. So we've got a distal contact over here, but still not a distal contact on 14. So obviously I'm going to do the DO over here on 3. And then if you had had that same situation, you would have wanted to do the MO on 14. But of course, I have a partial prep on that one already. But that's the thought process that I wanted you to go through. So let's go back to the 330 burr. And we're going to do exactly what I was showing on the lecture slide. I'm going to put a hole right next to the adjacent tooth. And as close as possible to the adjacent tooth, but in the middle of the contact, facial-lingually. And of course, I would hope you'd use a newer burr than this. So every prep should be a new burr. So I'm going to go out facially. Still a little bit farther. Again, trial and error. Okay, now I know I'm going to get facial clearance, so I can cut straight in from there. And that's pretty close to 90. Presuming we're doing an amalgam prep. So that wall's pretty much perpendicular to the surface at the margin. Now let's go lingually. Again, with the burr as close as we can get it to the adjacent tooth. A little farther. And a little farther. And that's about right. So now we're going to cut from there in straight. And we'll adjust the angle until it's 90 degrees by trial and error. It's a little bit obtuse now. Then we always start the margin and cut inward until we get the angle just the way we want. If the wall is taller than the burr, I might have to cut in at 2 different levels in order to get that wall nice and flat. So the lingual side's starting to look pretty good. All right, so now we need to include the distal pit. Now in this typodont, there's 2 distal pits. Weird, huh? Okay, so we have to include both of them, so I'm going to have to include this pit over here. So I'm going to look along the oblique ridge, start right here, and then cut toward my eye. And just try to include that pit, just barely. Okay, that's about the best I can do on this typodont because of the anomalous 2-pit thing. You'll see the lower arch also has, the lower first molars also have 2 distal pits. Now I'm going to just smooth a connection in there, and then I'm going to get rid of the excess over here. Make a flat floor. Now we have the occlusal outline the way that we want. Now let's see, the wall height here is still a little bit short. So I'm going to go a little deeper pulpally, coming through this area. So the wall height in here is 1.5 millimeters tall, and I'm going to go into the distal angle groove until I get 1.5 millimeters there. And then we're okay. So now we're ready to go gingivally. Okay, so now I'm going to put the burr where I want it axially. I'm going to put it against the facial wall. I'm going to keep the burr vertical, and I'm going to drill a hole and then cut away from that wall. Let me do the same thing on the lingual side. Put the burr against the lingual wall, make sure it's vertical, position it where I want to axially, drill a hole, and cut away from this wall. Okay, then when we make the connection together, you should have a nice shape for the axial wall. Let's go ahead and get rid of the excess. steps 5, 6, and 7. Get rid of excess along the facial, along the lingual, then in between. Smooth the gingival floor all the way to the margin. This burr will allow you to do that. Then you can see how much clearance you have gingivally. Still got a little hook on the lingual margin. You can trim part of that away with the burr, and then the rest of it we're going to use a hand instrument for. Let's smooth the gingival floor a little more in this area here. Okay, so let's go ahead and use the hand instruments. In the upper left, the upper right, I'll use the hoe for the facial lingual walls. So I'm going to come down the facial wall like this, using the mirror so I can look down that margin. I'm going to sharpen the internal line angle. Come down the lingual margin, looking down the wall in the mirror. Sharpen the internal line angle. Then I'm going to use the enamel hatchet. Put the sharp edge against the axial wall, and then I can make the retentive groove into the facial wall, and then into the lingual wall. Then I can use the distal gingival margin trimmer when I turn the patient to the right to bevel the axial pulpal line angle and angle the gingival floor all the way to the facial lingual wall. So all this should sound pretty familiar. So again, if you're not using the hand instruments doing each of these things, you're not finishing the prep, so you won't learn how to finish the prep. Okay, but that's all we have to do for this prep.